To say that situation in Fred's living room was a bit tense was like saying that inside of a star was a touch warm. In one corner, the Council of Comrades growled and hissed at the newcomer who, in turn, responded with either sarcasm or plain ignorance. And in the middle of all this stood Mayor van der Sechs, once more confused out of his mind and still dizzy from drinking refined and processed blood of an ancient, generally innocent, mountain-sized leviathan. A peaceful and friendly leviathan, according to history books, mixed with motor oil. He tried to intercede several times, but it was clear that this situation was something comrades had to resolve between themselves, and after a few minutes he just slinged back onto his sofa and tried to survive to the end of this conversation, painfully aware of a massive hangover his dimensional trip brought up. At least Comrade 3 was polite enough, even in his anger, that he swept away dusty remains of the magical horse and tossed them out of the window, but even as the golem was doing it, its gaze never left Comrade 4's face. "I'll give you one thing, traitor," Comrade 2 said, sharpening her blades with obvious malicious intent. "I never expected you to have the balls to face us again."
And yet you see me now and haven't gone completely berserk with mindless rage. That means your little brain may actually not be all that resistant to change. Means me leaving actually had some effect on your drones. Color me impressed as well.
In response, Comrade 1 looked like he was about to have a stroke, which, believe me, is a lot more visually scary when it comes to deep ones like himself. His tentacles spasmed and twitched all over, but he finally managed to say, "Leave? You didn't just leave, you ruined our entire department!"
Ah, and here I thought you always said every comrade is equally important. But besides, could you stop overreacting? You all call me traitor and Emperor knows what else, but all I've done was just hand in my resignation.
Another shockwave went through the rank of urbanization comrades, as if what they just heard was completely and utterly unthinkable.
"Just hand in your resignation?"
Comrade 3 stepped in, seeing that his tentacled colleague was rendered speechless by these words.
"You mean just ruined cohesion of entire department, throwing entire structure of Ministry of Urbanization into disarray and causing unreasonably long delays in our work while we tried to look for your replacement? Because that is exactly what you did, Comrade 4. For star's sake, do you know how long it takes to train another specialist in your field? We had to offload a number of your responsibilities onto the mayor here, which is a procedure that never ever should be used in an efficient bureaucracy."
The newcomer looked actually surprised to hear that, and for the first time he turned his attention to Fred.
That's very unfortunate, sir. I'm very sorry you had to deal with it. Let me guess. Judging by that empty, thousand-yard stare in your eyes, I'd say you've already had to wrestle with public transport, right?
Fred nodded to that without saying anything. His headache was getting worse with every moment, and he kept seeing glimpses of other realities.
I see. I saw your work while I was on my way here, but let me guess. It did not work at all, right?
"It's like they don't even register these buses as something that exists," Fred replied hopelessly. "I talked to the man in charge of the depot and he said that over the past week we only moved around 200 people, and about half of them only entered the bus in the first place because they thought it was some kind of tourist attraction or a restaurant on wheels. I knew federals would be against it because they're allergic to any kind of public service, but I had no idea our own people would just ignore them as well."
Frustrating, isn't it? And now consider that I had to deal with such things ever since I could read. I'm sorry you had to deal with it in my stead, but in the end it's not my fault. The ministry should expect that some of its workers may not want to spend their entire lives doing one job, and should have replacements ready to take over.
Once again, Comrade 1 replied to words of his former colleague with red-hot anger. "Replacements? What are we, the Ministry of Healthcare? Ever since it was created, the Ministry of Urbanization prided itself on its employees being the most diligent and loyal public servants of the Empire. In our entire history, no one, not a single being, ever left our ranks. And then you came along and ruined our reputation with your unruly, rebellious ideas. Can you imagine how hard it was to explain this to the minister? Poor man had a heart attack when he heard about your resignation, and no wonder. We're a laughingstock now. Even Ministry of Post-Mortem has a better record now, and half of their employees are dead." Comrade 4 opened his mouth to say something, but then closed it again for a moment as if thinking. When he finally spoke again, he sounded completely resigned.
So, it's reputation and inter-ministry power play again. Of course it is. Whatever could I expect from a bunch of office drones, bred for one specific job by previous generation of office drones? Can you see what I had to deal with through most of my life, Mayor? Day in, day out, always the same issues, the same faces, the same paperwork. Couldn't even catch a break during actual breaks, because all these people talk about is work. I tried to drag them to some parties long ago, but you guessed it, all they did was talk about work, even after I gave them the strongest alcohol I could ferment from my documents.
I miss cellulose spreadsheet booze. No one could make it like you did, Comrade 7 said with nostalgia in his voice, but quickly went silent after stern gazes of his co-workers. Clearly, having good memories of Comrade 4 was not allowed.
Anyways, after 2 decades of doing one thing without a single day off, I decided to try something new. I had good references, the Ministry of Reality had job openings. Because, unlike urbanization, they don't actually breed entirety of their workforce under the building. And the resignation procedure was there, so I went for it. That's all there is to it. But as you can clearly see, Mayor, my colleagues act as if I've committed some unspeakable crimes against the Empire.
Judging by the looks on their faces, Council of Comrades was still convinced that Comrade 4's actions were indeed the worst crime imaginable, but before they could say anything, Fred seized this opportunity to cut their pointless back and forth short and barged into their conversation. Right, I'm sure this is all very dramatic story. You should go to a pub, talk it over a pint of beer, he hinted without any hope of the bureaucrats actually leaving his goddamn living room. But all this arguing is not very efficient use of our time, so maybe instead of doing it we'll give our guest a chance to say what he's actually doing here. And, without even waiting for a response, he grabbed Comrade 4 by the arm and dragged him to his office, something that proved rather difficult, and locked the doors behind them, leaving still fuming urbanization people behind.
Thank you kindly for your intervention there, Mayor. If we stayed there, their complaints would have dragged on forever, believe me. But where are my manners? In all this chaos, I completely forgot to introduce myself. I am...
Comrade 4, Fred said coldly, taking position behind his desk and pointed to an uncomfortable-looking chair on the other side. I believe your colleagues would say that names are unprofessional, so let's keep it on the level. But please sit and tell me exactly what you want.
Very well. A shrewd move on your part, Mayor. You clearly seem to be adjusting very well to your new position. And as for what I want...
Suddenly, Comrade 4 simply stopped talking, and his jaw hanged open as his eyes spotted something on the opposite wall. Fred followed his gaze, expecting some snarky remarks, since, after all, his office was more of a man cave than a place of official business, but before he could react, he heard...
By the Emperor. Is that a limited edition figurine of clumsy yet lovable catgirl princess? I had no idea they were still made.
Within a mere second, the snarky, sarcastic mask of Comrade 4 fell apart, leaving behind an excited, babbling man-child.
Not after that mess in the south, and that there! Is that a gas girl? Do you have any idea how long I've hunted for this model? They only make them on that one backwater world.
Suffice to say, Fred was not expecting something like that, though deep down he instantly felt a sense of friendship with his fellow man of culture, so he just sat there silent, allowing his guest to take his collection in, confused beyond words by this complete change of personality. It took about 4 minutes of excited banter before Comrade 4, red at the face and with his eyes gleaming, finally got a hold of himself.
Yes, well, a very particular collection, clearly indicating a man of fine taste. Yes.
He said, embarrassed, and then finally sat down on the uncomfortable chair and immediately shifted his weight around to try and make it at least marginally tolerable.
Right then, back to business.
He began, his face once more cold and impenetrable.
I have an offer for you, Mayor. As I've already mentioned in the other room, I am part of Ministry of Reality, and my official job here is to ensure that the laws of our universe are not violated in a way that would cause us troubles. But there's more to it. You may be surprised to hear it, but I don't just work for one ministry. I'm also acting on behalf of another, far more powerful and important one.
Let me guess. Ministry of Finance? Fred asked bluntly.
My. A smart man you are indeed, Mayor. What gave it away?
Fred's face, in that moment, expressed exactly nothing when he replied. Gold. You wear a gold suit, Comrade 4. And not just one that's colored gold, but made of actual stuff. I'm surprised you can even walk in it.
Let's just say it's one of the benefits of the job. After all, money can buy anything, including exclusion from law of physics. And Ministry of Finance is known to be generous to its undercover employees. Which brings me to my second, far more important point. As I said, my job is to spot and eradicate all issues that could have an adverse effect on our reality. But that is, quite frankly, a very short-sighted and dangerously un-imperial way of doing things. Suffice to say, finance believes that anything can be sold, and the more exotic and outlandish such a commodity is, the more people will pay for it. For example, that colourful horse you brought from your dimensional trip? I had to vaporize it to make appearances, but the truth is that such a creature could be sold for obscene amounts of money to the right people. You'd be surprised how many of our own citizens would end up being obsessed with such small horses. Of course, some would judge them and tell them to find a different hobby, but our Ministry of Finance doesn't work that way. It's not our place to judge, but to earn money wherever possible. As long as it doesn't openly threaten stability of the Empire, of course.
Fred listened to that tirade with an increasing feeling of dread and distrust within his head, and he voiced his concerns immediately. Right, it all sounds very fancy and shiny and whatnot, but doesn't that mean that you directly disobey Imperial orders and jurisdiction? This can be a healthy and a long career, not if executors catch the wind of what you do.
You'd think that, but there is nothing treasonous in our actions. In fact, we follow His Majesty's orders to the letter. He told us to finance the Empire and his grand plans, and we do just that. Obeying official paperwork to the letter. Granted, we do it in a bit of a creative and roundabout way, but that's only because we are the smartest ones. My colleagues from Urbanization, on the other hand, are dreadfully traditionalist and close-minded. Which is why I had to leave. They would never understand the lengths we have to go to fund this glorious nation. So, to wrap this all up, all I want is for me to let me do my job, and I will ensure that the money will keep flowing. And I'll even make sure that boundaries of our plane aren't broken while I'm at it. Do we have a deal?
Fred went silent for a moment, pondering his options. At one hand, accepting the deal still felt treasonous to his conditioned mind of a soldier, which filled him with a sense of unease. But on the other hand, it was a duty of every Imperial citizen to follow the middle way and earn as much wealth as possible wherever and whenever possible. Not to mention that having an enemy in Ministry of Finance felt almost as dangerous as messing with His Majesty himself. Comrade 4 must have sensed this internal struggle because he went completely silent, once again fully absorbed by Fred's figurine collection, giving the mayor all the time he needed. Finally, several minutes later, Fred raised his head and pierced his visitor with a steely gaze that many unlucky demons have seen shortly before dying a very gruesome death. Fine, the mayor said firmly, but you focus on your reality-protecting job first, understood?
Of course. Perfectly acceptable.
And you don't work inside my home.
Right. I wasn't planning on that. I already have a room rented in one of the hive towers. Very nice view. So, I'll leave all the forms you need to sign. And I'll look forward to our prosperous future in this lovely city you're building. Now then, shall we return? It seems there's some commotion in the living room. A very profitable sounding commotion.
He added with a glint in his eyes. And indeed, something really was happening in the living room, and Fred clearly heard the main door to his house slam shut, but before he and his guest could get up and investigate, another voice said,
"Oh boy, a commotion! Let's indeed investigate, just like responsible adults should."
Both Fred and Comrade 4 just stared at the small, colorful creature as it walked out seemingly from nowhere.
That sounds like a great idea! But, you know, how about we not do that? And instead, do something actually interesting. I'm sure I can find something we can either snort, smoke, and/or inject, and have a better time than whatever it is you're planning to do now.
The gold-plated guest stared at the magical horse for another second and then, without blinking, reached under his expensive suit.
Please excuse me for a moment, this shouldn't happen,
he said, visibly distressed.
I must have used the wrong frequency or something. Now it should work.
With that, he pulled out a small, flashlight-like object and turned it on, bathing the entire room in brilliant blue light. With the next second, said light focused on the small creature and, just like before, turned it into dust.
Right, that's that. Now you'll see what I meant when I said we need to be careful about profiting from breaches in reality. Although, judging by what this thing said in that distillery I've seen in your living room, I'm starting to think it may have more to do with inside of your minds than any other universe.
Cynthia, darling, can you please stop trying to turn me into dust and just kindly tell Cortus to go fuck himself?
The magical horse said, appearing out of nowhere again as if nothing happened.
And give my man here a break. He has a stressful job and he drinks only as a hobby, nothing else.
Both men just looked at the horse again and then at each other, until Comrade 4 finally said,
Right, guess you need to deal with your inner demons yourself, Mayor. Just keep it on a leash. Now, shall we see what this noise is about?
Fred agreed and they went downstairs, leaving the colourful inner demon locked up in the mayor's office. Not that something as simple as locked doors could hold this concentrated degeneracy in place, but it was worth a try, if only to feel better. But it was not the end of troubles, for as both men went downstairs, they learned about some inexplicable troubles to the north, where Mr. Pernicle, the construction wizard, was sent with a few of two-digit comrades to start building a new hive. And the reason for said hive was simple. One day, Comrade 3 decided to go for a walk and, being a diligent official, also sampled some of the local dirt, which turned out to be extremely rich in what he considered to be very tasty minerals. Without wasting even a second, he returned back to Fred's home and reported his findings, sending the rest of the comrades into a frantic daze, eager beyond words to be able to start working on something that no true imperial city could live without, a sprawling, imposing military-industrial complex where steel foundations of the Empire would be built. Not that Empire itself was a warmongering nation, though. In fact, in its entire history, it never declared war on anyone, though it did not stop it from invading its enemies as retaliation for wars declared upon itself. It was far more propelled to deal with any upstart enemies economically, by flooding their markets with imperial goods and culture and taking all the money in return. But, despite this mostly pacifistic and cultural victory mindset, cities of the greatest nation in the world almost always housed great military factories. For war, despite being oh so very bothersome and problematic, was simply way too profitable for proper followers of the middle way to ignore, especially if it was a war waged by someone else. And so, even though there was barely any fighting in the Empire itself, its factories kept building machines of war every day and night, sending them all over this and other worlds, to the point that you'd have to be very lucky to find any conflict that was not fought using them. Firelander and Frostlander traditionalists, as they like to call themselves, waged their never-ending conflict in tanks and fire-resistant ships made by Imperial workers. Deadlanders rushed around their ashen plains in Imperial-made all-terrain trucks and zipped above their stormy, monster-infested mountains in aerostatic airships. Even Deep Ones dropped their traditional organic tentacle ships in favor of Imperial submarines to patrol outskirts of the sunken city, where no one should go if they want to keep their mind. So, long story short, when the news of this new, rich source of minerals reached comrades of Ministry of Urbanization, they could barely contain their happiness. For now, they could finally put their new city on the map as a truly prestigious place, one worthy of His Majesty's attention and approval. Unfortunately, things were not about to go smoothly, and as Fred and his council of comrades reached their new construction site, they realized what the problem was right away. A new network of roads was already set in place thanks to Mr. Pernicle's work, but as the mayor noticed, said roads appeared to be even more twisted and crooked than before, almost as if the construction wizard had troubles focusing on his job. But the far more important issue were the trees, which were still in the area and even grew right from the asphalt road. It was as if the forest itself simply refused to move. Seeing that, Comrade 1 shook his head and snapped his fingers, summoning Mr. Pernicle and his handlers.
Really?
He asked in a tired voice.
These tricks again? I thought you learned your lesson after last time, Mr. Pernicle. Do we really have to send you to Miss Lange's re-education school for naughty demonologists?
Mr. Pernicle shrieked in response, and Fred, for the first time, saw genuine terror in his eyes. Some part of him wanted to ask about this re-education school, but a reasonable bit of his brain rushed in and leashed that curiosity before it doomed them all.
Not your fault, you say?
Comrade 1 continued, this time sounding disappointed.
Then perhaps we should relieve you of your duties and find another construction wizard for this project, if you feel like you can't handle it.
The chained demonologist shrieked again, and this time there was a hint of offense in his voice. It was as if he was trying to say, "Now listen to me, you little bitch, I'm the best sorcerer this pathetic country ever had, despite you wrapping me in those mana-dampened chains like some BDSM freaks. I may be a mere shadow of my former self, but when I do something, I do it right, damn it. So how about you cut me a break and maybe listen to what your other office drones have to say before threatening me again? Because I swear to the void, next time you pull something like that off, I'm going to build a skyscraper right on top of your tentacly head. Oh stars, it burns, end it!" It was indeed a very long and complicated shriek, but it got the point across, and Comrade 1 turned his attention to Comrades 11 and 12, who were tasked with keeping an eye on Mr. Pernicle.
"What do you mean the trees don't want to move?"
he asked after they finished explaining, but before they could answer, another voice suddenly ringed above the field. "It means you can't just resettle us against our will, you rubbery freak. Me and my lads and molasses may not conform to your stupid little having arms and legs and brains club, but we still have rights, damn it!" The voice came seemingly from all directions at once, causing Fred and his entourage to look around confused for its source, until about a second later when they realized that it came from the trees themselves. "That's right. We've been here long before you decided to bring your stupid extraction business along, so bugger off and don't come back without proper documents if you want us to move," the forest continued, causing even more confusion amongst the council.
"Dear me, it seems we have some abnormally intelligent flora here,"
Comrade 1 said, turning to Fred.
"I thought you said the deranged forest was the one near the lake, not here."
"Hey, don't put us in the same bag as these freaks," the Woods objected. "Unlike our cousins in the south, we don't eat people and we don't collude with demons or crazy sorcerers."
"You say so,"
Comrade 1 replied.
"and yet here you are talking to us, which is something trees generally don't do. And that kinda looks like work of demons or crazy sorcerers to me."
Ha! Typical mindset of a bureaucrat. I suspected you and your grey-faced friends may be office drones, but now I have a perfect confirmation. And just because something is not written in your boring-ass procedures doesn't mean it's not real or true.
That still does not explain how you can talk.
Natural selection, my dude. Me and my lads and lasses had to adapt to bastards like you coming along and screwing everything up for us. Can you imagine just how awful it is? You just sit around minding your own damn business, photosynthesizing in peace like the Great Acorn commands, and suddenly a bunch of small pinkskins come along with their creepy buzzing machines, chop your item in the middle, and slice your upper body into some nice ornate furniture. And yeah, sure, it may be pretty damn posh and flashy furniture, but it doesn't change the fact that you're bloody dead and gone by that point. So we had to learn how to defend ourselves. So far, yelling at you is enough, but just you wait until we figure out how to walk and beat your asses.
But in that case, why aren't all the trees talking? And not just ones in other forests, but ones in this one as well. I would guess they would be just as eager to stop us from moving them as you are, Comrade 1 asked. This caused the tree to lower its voice to a conspiratory whisper. Yeah, well, truth be told, my lads and lasses here aren't exactly too bright. I've been pollinating each other for a bit too long now, and it took it all. But just you wait, one day soon the United Plante Alliance will rise up against your oppression and throw down the chains of your choice tyranny. Fred and his comrades stared at each other, and then the mayor turned to the forest and said, Right, nice tale, but that still doesn't explain why only one of you can talk, so kindly give us the true version, not the full of shit propaganda one. Right now, chop chop, preferably before I'm forced to go back home for the flamethrower. For a while, the only sound that you could hear was the rustling of the leaves on the wind, but then finally the voice spoke again.
Right, easy, see what I mean? We try to stand up for ourselves and you lot immediately threaten us with fire. But you're right. Trees can't talk, or at least most of them. But I can. I was a pot plant in the Ministry of Postmortem and all of their magic must have rubbed off on me in some way. Had a pretty chill life there, but I grew too much, so they decided to replant me somewhere else and I ended up here. But everything else I said is true. My bros here may not be able to tell you to piss off, but I can, and I bloody damn will. We have rights. Sorry to break it to you, tree boy, but I don't recall any laws that protect trees from being cut down. That will cause a bit of an issue. And you'd be wrong, soldier boy, the tree replied, angered by Fred's tone. Fact I was in the ministry meant I had a lot of chances to listen to bureaucrats like yourself, and I learned that there's a new law that guarantees safety from harm to anyone who provides necessary service to the Empire. And, you know, me and my crew kinda give you oxygen you need to be alive, which I'd say makes us quite necessary for you indeed. So bug it off.
He's right,
Comrade 1 said after a short confusion.
Normally it wouldn't matter because trees are non-sentient, but this one clearly is, so we can't do anything without proper paperwork. And, oh dear, that would mean we'd have to go to the Ministry of Environment, and everyone knows how slowly they work. We'd be stuck in loopholes for a decade, if not more. Comrade 3, are you sure we can't just build these mines and the hive somewhere else?
The golem simply shook its head and everyone started wondering what other options they had, until suddenly Fred's inner demon walked out from amongst the trees.
Aw, that's so adorable. You're trying to find a lawful approach out of this situation. It really gives me hope for this place, you know? But since you clearly have no idea how to deal with it, how about I offer you some alternatives? Fred, my man, my brony, listen. When you were jumping between alternate realities, you dropped into a very special one for a moment, though you probably don't even remember it. It was a fancy place. Floating rocks, blue-skinned tall cat people. Basically 2.5 hours worth of CGI directed by James Cameron. Now, they had no industry and were all tree-hugging hippie animal fuckers. So, how about we move our leafy friend over there? Everybody wins!
Wait, floating rocks? Speaker of all the trees said, clearly excited. You mean I'll actually have some interesting stuff to look at instead of those inbred morons? I mean my comrades in arms? Then hell yeah, I'm in. I want one with the best view though, and you have to move them there as well. Wait, Fred said, confused by this sudden change of heart. Just like that? What about your revolution? Oh, it'll come in time, but for now I'd really love a change of scenery, and though I love these saplings like brothers and sisters, they're not exactly great conversation partners. And hey, I know what's good for them, so let's do it. You hear it, inbreds? We're moving to a new flashy neighborhood. Take your squirrels, cause we're not coming back, so, how will that work?
Not to worry, we'll get it done. Mr. Pernicle's many skills also include teleportation, so all we have to do is tell him where to drop you and you'll be on your way. You hear that, Mr. Pernicle? Another chance for you to prove yourself. Get to it.
The wizard shrieked. He was really rather samey with his words, but this time he sounded tired of all this nonsense and just waved his chained arms in the air, making all the trees disappear one by one, roots and leaves included. Moments later, the area was mostly clear and he returned to his real work without hearing even a single word of thanks from the rest. Right, Fred said, as new hive districts started appearing out of thin air. Glad that's sorted out. By the way, shouldn't you be the one dealing with things like that, Comrade 4? The golden bureaucrat stirred to life, as his mind was clearly focusing on something else.
Oh no, not in the slightest. You'd be surprised how many inanimate objects in the Empire suddenly gain sentience from all our hospitality. Instead, I'm far more interested in what you people will dig out from there. I have a feeling I'll have a lot more work on my hands when first mine opens up.
No, you won't, Comrade 1 said decisively. Nothing wrong will happen here and you will be able to leave and never return. Now please, let us return to the office. I've had enough of nature for this year. The only thing trees are really good for is the fact that you can turn them into paper for official documents. And speaking of official documents, we'll have to fill the forms of all the trees we just relocated. They were property/citizens of the Empire after all.
Fred just sighed. Of course there would be more paperwork after all this. There was always more paperwork. It was time to return to work.